My daughter-in-law had an accident and fell into a coma. During one of my visits to the hospital, my grandson approached me and whispered, "Grandma, Mom isn't sick. She's faking it." Confused, I replied, "What? Don't talk like that." Then he handed me his phone, and my blood ran cold. I pulled my old motorcycle from in front of the bakery, my hands still sticky with the scent of flour and yeast. It had been a busier morning than usual at Ellie's Sweet Spot. Customers streamed in and out without pause. Every day that passed, I felt a small joy watching the warm breads and pastries arranged on the racks and listening to the laughter and chatter of the people. But all I really wanted in that moment was to get to the school for Eli, my beloved grandson. The boy was always eager to tell me what happened in class, his eyes sparkling as if he wanted to show me the entire world. Just thinking about his smile made all my tiredness disappear. I had just put on my helmet, ready to start the engine, when the phone in my pocket vibrated hard. An unfamiliar number. I frowned and hesitated for a second, but I finally held it to my ear. The voice on the other end sounded rushed and cold, like a knife interrupting my thoughts. "Are you Mrs. Hayes? Your daughter-in-law has just been in a serious traffic accident. We are rushing her to Piedmont General Hospital." A buzzing filled my ears, as if the whole world had suddenly gone silent. The bike wobbled under my hands. I almost dropped it. I froze, clutching the handlebars, feeling like the blood had stopped flowing in my body. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out every noise around me. Chandra, my daughter-in-law, whom I had always loved like a daughter, in a serious accident. Those words echoed again and again in my head, but I couldn't grasp their true weight. I only knew that, in that instant, I had to go, see her, and find out what was happening. I quickly dialed Marcus's number, my son, but only heard the phone ringing without an answer. He must already be at the hospital, I told myself, trying to stay calm, but inside me fear burned like a wildfire, consuming any attempt to think clearly. I wanted to rush straight to the hospital, but suddenly I remembered Eli. The boy was still at school, waiting for me to pick him up. I couldn't leave him alone, and I couldn't let him find out from anyone else. I had to be strong. For Eli, for Marcus, for the whole family. With a burning heart, I sped toward the school. The streets of Atlanta seemed more congested than ever. Every car, every horn was a wall holding me back. Every second that passed felt like a stab. How is Chandra? Is she in pain? Is she conscious? Images of a brutal accident flashed through my mind, and I had to push them away forcefully. All I could do was pray, whispering the appeals my mother had taught me as a child, begging for a miracle. When I reached the school gate, I saw Eli waiting, hugging his superhero backpack. His little face lit up when he saw me, his eyes twinkling as if he was about to tell me something funny, but I couldn't wait. I couldn't let him finish. In a hoarse, shaky voice, I told him, "Eli, get on the bike now. Your mother had an accident. We have to go to the hospital." I watched his smile vanish instantly, like a light being switched off. He didn't ask anything. He just climbed on in silence, his small hands gripping my waist tightly the whole way. He didn't say a word, but I felt his fear in the pressure of that embrace. I wanted to turn around, hug him, and tell him everything would be okay, but even I didn't dare believe it. Piedmont General Hospital appeared before my eyes, cold and suffocating. The white building, the strong smell of disinfectant invading my nose, made me feel short of breath. I led Eli by the hand through the long halls. My steps were hurried but heavy. When we reached the emergency room, I saw Marcus standing there, stunned, like a ghost. His hair was messy, his formerly impeccable white shirt was now wrinkled, and the sleeves were stained with dark blood. I knew it was Chandra's blood, from when he had carried his wife in. Seeing my son like that tore my soul apart. Marcus, my strong son, now looked like a lost boy. When he saw me, Marcus ran toward me. He buried his head in my shoulder, sobbing like never before. "Mom, Chandra, the doctor said the situation is very grave." His voice broke and trembled as if all his strength had disappeared. I hugged him, trying to stay steady, but I was trembling too. Eli, seeing his father cry, also burst into tears, his childish, disoriented voice shouting, "Mommy!" The boy clung tightly to Marcus's pants, his large eyes full of fear, as if terrified of being abandoned. In the midst of this storm, I knelt, pulling him to my chest, trying to shield him. But how could I protect him when I myself was drowning in fear? The three of us sat on the cold plastic chairs in the hallway. Time seemed to have stopped. The strong smell of disinfectant, the dry voice of the intercom sounding repeatedly. Every noise was like a knife piercing my heart. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Eli, and then at the closed emergency room door. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to do anything to know how Chandra was. But I could only stay there, helpless, waiting. Almost 3 hours passed, long as a century. Finally, the emergency room door opened. An older man with a serious face came out, introducing himself as Dr. Alan Thorne, the hospital director. His voice was deep and measured, as if he weighed every word. The patient suffered a severe traumatic brain injury and has fallen into a state of deep coma. We did everything possible, but the moment she wakes up depends on the patient's will. Those words hit me like a blow to the chest. Deep coma. The patient's will. Those phrases resonated in my mind, but I couldn't comprehend them. Chandra, the woman who was always radiant, full of life, now lay motionless between life and death. Marcus collapsed. If I hadn't held him up, he would have fallen to the floor. His eyes glazed over as if his entire world had crumbled. Eli, frightened, huddled in my arms, his small body shaking. I hugged him tightly, trying to hide my pain, but my tears were already flowing, silent, impossible to stop. I didn't want Eli to see his grandma crying, but how could I be strong when my family was breaking apart? A young nurse with a badge that read Sarah approached with a control chart. In a soft voice, she said, "The family can see the patient through the glass, but please, no noise." I nodded. I took Eli and Marcus to the thick glass. Through it, I saw Chandra motionless, surrounded by a tangle of wires. Her face was pale, lifeless. Her lips, which always smiled, were now closed, as if she had gone far away, to a place we couldn't reach. Marcus leaned his forehead on the glass and cried out desperately, "My love, open your eyes and look at me." His heartbreaking voice echoed, shattering the quiet of the hallway. Nurses rushed to gently calm him, but I knew nothing could alleviate my son's pain in that moment. I stood there holding Eli, feeling every weak beat of his small heart. I wanted to say something, to comfort him, but my throat closed up, unable to utter a single word. That night, I almost had to drag Eli back home. The boy was crying inconsolably. He wanted to stay with his mother, but I couldn't leave him in the suffocating atmosphere of the hospital. I comforted him. I promised we would return the next day, though I myself didn't know what awaited us. Marcus insisted on staying, huddled in a plastic chair in the hallway, his gaze lost, fixed on the door of the room. I looked at my son, and my heart broke. But I knew I couldn't stay. Eli needed me, the bakery needed me, and this whole family depended on me to stay standing. In the days following that fateful moment, my small house seemed covered by a heavy, dark fog. Every morning, upon waking, I felt a rock had settled on my chest, making every breath difficult. I've lived 62 years. I've witnessed separations and deaths, but I'd never felt as helpless as I did now. Chandra was still there, at the hospital, immobile as a statue, and Marcus, the son whose strength I was so proud of, was now just a shadow, turning Piedmont General Hospital into his second home. Every day, I saw Marcus sitting in front of Chandra's room, motionless as a stone figure. His eyes were red, without their former sparkle. During the day, he stayed there, staring intently at the emergency room door, as if by simply watching long enough, Chandra would open her eyes, walk out, and smile at him as before. But at night, when darkness fell, Marcus sought the comfort of alcohol. More than once, I found him sitting alone on a hospital bench, a bottle of bourbon in his hand, his gaze lost like a troubled soul. Once I arrived earlier than usual and found him passed out in the hallway next to an empty bottle rolling across the floor. A young nurse, perhaps Sarah, approached cautiously and whispered, "Mrs. Hayes, he shouldn't drink so much. It's not good for him." I could only nod, suppressing a sigh, though inside I felt something choking me. I did everything I could to pull Marcus out of that abyss. Every morning, I got up at 3, turned on the small oven and prepared fresh bread, the kind he loved so much. I carefully wrapped it and took it to the hospital, hoping that the familiar aroma would awaken something in him. But it was always the same. He barely took a couple of bites and would leave the rest, his gaze fixed on the door of room 412. "Mom, I'm not hungry," he would murmur in a hoarse voice, as if he had no emotion left. I looked at him and felt myself breaking inside. I wanted to scream at him, shake him, tell him he had to live, be strong for Eli, for himself. But I could only silently gather the plates, taking them back with a heavy heart. The burden of the entire family now rested on my aging shoulders. I wasn't young anymore. Every morning when I woke up, I felt every joint aching, every muscle tired. But I couldn't stop. Ellie's sweet spot was our only source of income, and I had to keep it going. At 3 in the morning, when the entire city was asleep, I was already kneading dough and lighting the oven. The smell of hot bread used to bring me joy, but now it only reminded me of the peaceful days we had lost. During the day, I ran the shop while constantly checking the clock, then rushing to pick up Eli. There were days when the clientele was so large I could barely breathe, but I still had to grit my teeth and smile at every person, even though all I wanted inside was to collapse. Eli, my little grandson, also changed completely. He used to be the sunshine of the house, with his radiant smile and endless stories. But now he had become quiet, reserved. Every afternoon, after school, I saw him sitting silently in a corner of the playground, clutching his superhero backpack tightly, his gaze lost. Once his teacher took me aside, her voice filled with concern. "Mrs. Hayes, Eli has been very withdrawn lately. He doesn't play with the others, he just sits alone. Is there a problem at home?" I could only force a smile and casually reply, "He's just a little tired, don't worry." But inside, I knew well that Eli carried a wound too big for his small heart. I wanted to hug him, tell him everything would be all right. But how could I promise something I didn't even believe myself? Every afternoon I took Eli to the hospital to visit his mother. It was part of the routine, part of that fragile hope that Chandra would wake up. But the scene at the hospital never changed. Marcus was still there, with an unkempt beard, smelling strongly of alcohol. I tried to keep Eli from noticing, but the boy was more sensitive than I thought. He silently took the drawings he made in class, taped them against the cold glass, and whispered to his mother, "Mommy, today I drew the whole family at the beach. It's you, Daddy, Grandma, and me. Wake up soon so we can go, okay?" His voice trembled as if he were trying to hold on to a dream that was crumbling in his hands. I stood beside him, listening to every word with a broken heart. Chandra remained there, motionless, showing no signs of response. Marcus would often hold his son in his arms and say, with a choked voice, "Your mommy hears you, son. She'll get better soon." But it was he who ended up crying, and Eli, seeing him, would also burst into tears. I had to rush to comfort him and take him out of the room, even though I too was breaking down inside. My family's private life, which I was once so proud of, had now become the subject of gossip among the neighbors. One day, while standing in line at the grocery store, Miss Jenkins, a longtime acquaintance, pulled me aside and asked curiously, "I haven't seen Marcus and his wife together lately. What happened? Is Chandra doing okay?" I hesitated for an instant, trying to keep my voice calm. "Chandra had an accident. She's in the hospital." But Ms. Jenkins' inquisitive look and the murmurs of those nearby made me want to disappear. I clutched my basket and practically ran out, but the comments followed me like needles pricking my pride. I didn't want my family to be the subject of conversation, but I knew that in a small neighborhood like this, nothing could be hidden forever. That night, Marcus stumbled home, reeking of alcohol. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes and shouted, "Don't tell anyone about Chandra! I don't need their pity!" His voice was harsh, but I knew that behind that fury was a pain impossible to put into words. I simply nodded silently, containing a sigh, and let him stagger up to his room. Eli was on the stairs, his innocent eyes following his father's unsteady silhouette. He didn't say anything, just walked sadly to his room, tightly hugging his Spider-Man pillow. Seeing him like that, I wanted to run and hug him, but I knew nothing could alleviate his pain in that moment. That night, I stayed alone in the cold kitchen, facing a mountain of bills that kept growing. Chandra's hospital expenses, Eli's school, the maintenance of the bakery. Every number felt like a cut to my soul. I had worked my entire life with sweat and effort to build a stable life for my family, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. That afternoon, the Atlanta sun was still relentless. I had just finished cleaning the bakery. I locked the door, helped Eli into the car, and prepared for the daily hospital visit. The boy was in the back seat, silent, clutching his superhero backpack tightly, as if it were the last comfort he had left. I wanted to say something to break the silence, but my throat closed up. I could only sigh and step on the gas. Upon arriving at Piedmont General Hospital, the familiar painful scene appeared before my eyes. The hallway was still cold. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose, and the announcements on the intercom sounded dry, one after another. Marcus was sitting on the plastic chairs, head slumped, nodding off from sheer exhaustion. At his feet, an empty beer can rolled, gleaming under the fluorescent light. Seeing my son like this broke my heart. Marcus was once a man full of life, always laughing and talking loudly. But now he was just a shadow, consumed by pain and alcohol. I motioned to Eli to be quiet. I didn't want to wake his father. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with worry, and followed me slowly. We both approached the thick glass of the room. Chandra was there, still, as if sunk into a deep sleep. The constant beep of the machines sounded steady, a cruel reminder that she was still alive but hanging by a thread. Her face was pale, without a trace of life. Her lips were closed as if they held a secret. I looked at her with a broken heart. How many times had I stood in that same spot, waiting for a miracle, waiting for her to open her eyes, smile, and say that it had all been just a nightmare. But it was always the same. Silence. And each time my heart broke a little more. I was about to take Eli's hand and lead him away to escape that suffocating atmosphere when suddenly he pulled at my clothes. He stood on his tiptoes, leaned close to my ear, and whispered softly, but with a force that pierced my soul, "Grandma, I don't think Mom is sick. She's faking it." I felt a sharp blow, as if someone had slapped me. I turned and looked directly into Eli's transparent eyes, trying to speak calmly, even though everything inside me was trembling. "Eli, don't be silly. Your mom is very sick. You know that." But the boy didn't argue as he usually did. He lowered his head, his hands shaking as he turned on the old cell phone Marcus had given him to watch cartoons. "Look at this, Grandma," he said in a voice so low I had to strain to hear him. The screen flickered and the image of Chandra's room, 412, appeared. In the video, there was no one else, just her lying in bed, surrounded by wires and tubes. But then, the unthinkable happened. Chandra slowly opened her eyes. She looked around as if checking that no one was there, and then she scratched her cheek quite naturally. A moment later, she even sat up a little. She took the glass of water from the table, drank a sip, and lay back down, closing her eyes to become immobile, as if nothing had happened. I stared at the screen, my head spinning, as if the whole world had been turned upside down. That wasn't a woman in a coma. That was a fraud. I let myself sink into the chair, my hands weak, nearly dropping the phone. Eli was beside me, his voice trembling as if he was frightened by his own discovery. "I've seen it several times, Grandma. Every time no one is here, Mom opens her eyes and looks around. But when you or Daddy are here, she stays still. I don't know what she's doing. That's why I recorded it secretly, so you could see it." Hearing him, a chill ran down my spine. Eli's innocent whisper, that short video, they were like a lightning bolt shattering the fog inside me. Chandra, my daughter-in-law, whom I had always loved like a daughter, was faking it. But why? For what purpose? I hurriedly shoved the phone into my purse, trying to keep my voice as stern as possible. Eli, you absolutely cannot tell your father about this. Do you understand? The boy nodded, his eyes shining with fear and confusion. I knew he didn't fully grasp what was happening, but he sensed the gravity. I hugged him, trying to hide the storm raging inside me, but right at that moment, Marcus stirred and woke up. He rubbed his eyes, looking at us with a hoarse voice. "What are you two talking about?" I started. I shook my head and diverted the topic. "Nothing. I was just reminding Eli to do his homework at home." Marcus nodded, then pulled his son toward him and whispered, "Don't worry, buddy. Your mom will wake up soon." Eli lowered his head, avoiding his father's gaze. Seeing him like that, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. He was too small to carry this burden, to keep a secret from his own father. On the way home, I drove the motorcycle as if floating, not feeling my feet touch the ground. My mind was chaos. The images from the video repeated over and over like a nonstop horror movie. Eli's murmur, his terrified gaze, and Chandra's motionless face. Everything was pieces that didn't fit. Was I misinterpreting this? Was it just an involuntary moment, a body reaction? But deep down, I knew that what I saw was no coincidence. Chandra was hiding something, and that filled me with dread. Not fear for her, but for Marcus, for Eli, for my entire family. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Before the first light of day filtered through the crack in the door, I arrived at Piedmont General Hospital when the hallways were still empty and only a few on-duty staff silently walked by. Marcus hadn't arrived yet. Perhaps he had gone home to clean up after spending an entire night next to his wife. I stood in the corner of the hallway, looking through the window into Chandra's room. She was still there, motionless, her face pale as wax. But now, every time I looked at her, I no longer saw the fragility of someone fighting between life and death. Instead, I only saw a veil of mystery, hiding something I still couldn't decipher. Sarah, the young nurse exclusively assigned to Chandra's care, was in the room. She was cleaning my daughter-in-law's body with smooth but somewhat mechanical movements. I hid around the corner, watching her every gesture. Sarah was working, but her eyes constantly darted outward, as if fearing being discovered. Occasionally, she murmured something so low I couldn't understand, but enough to transmit uneasiness. Something was not right. I knew it for sure. My heart was a tangle of anger and fear, but I kept repeating that I had to stay calm. If I wanted to uncover the truth, I couldn't let emotions dominate me. When Sarah came out of room 412 carrying the control chart, I inhaled deeply and advanced. She was bent over, writing, not noticing my presence. I tried to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding against my chest. "Good morning, Sarah. Tell me, in the moments when you care for Chandra, have you ever noticed anything out of the ordinary? For example, her secretly waking up when no one is around?" I pronounced each word carefully, closely watching her reaction. Sarah jumped, as if I had thrown a bomb directly at her chest. Her eyes opened wide, full of terror, and the pen she was holding fell to the floor with a dry clatter. That sound echoed in the silent hallway, confirming that I had struck right at her deepest fear. "Mrs. Hayes, what are you saying? I don't understand." Sarah stammered, avoiding my gaze, unable to hold it. She stepped back, clutching the control chart as if she wanted to cling to it. I moved closer, my voice firm, without a trace of softness. "That reaction means it's true, doesn't it?" I looked straight into her eyes, searching for a crack in her panic. Sarah's face was pale. Her lips trembled as if she were about to cry. She sank into the chair, speaking in a thread of a voice, barely a whisper. I was only following Dr. Thorne's orders. He asked me to keep the secret. Please. I'm just an employee. Don't drag me into this." That half-confession hit me like a lightning bolt. I stood still, feeling like the floor was opening beneath my feet. It was true. Chandra wasn't just faking the coma. Dr. Alan Thorne, the hospital director, was also involved. I tried to keep the anger out of my voice, though I was boiling inside. "What exactly did he ask you? Tell me clearly, Sarah." I advanced another step, giving her no room to escape. Sarah vigorously shook her head, wringing her hands, speaking haltingly. "He just ordered me to take good care of Mrs. Ortega, not to tell anyone that she had already woken up. I have nothing to do with anything else. I beg you, don't blame me." She looked up, her eyes red, as if pleading for forgiveness. But I couldn't yield, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed the truth. I needed to protect my son and my grandson from whatever was happening. At that moment, another nurse passed by the hallway, giving us a curious look. Sarah quickly stood up, picked up the pen, and pretended to resume her notes as if nothing had happened. I turned around silently, my heart pounding like a drum. Every step as I left the hallway felt heavy, as if I were carrying a rock. What Sarah had admitted not only confirmed my suspicions, but revealed something worse. This was not just a hoax by Chandra, but a deception backed by someone with power, like Dr. Thorne. What were they plotting? How could they be so cruel as to deceive an entire family, letting Marcus and Eli sink into pain? When Marcus arrived at the hospital, I tried to stay composed as if nothing had happened. He asked in a tired voice, "Mom, how is Chandra? Any news?" I just shook my head and replied softly, "She's the same. The doctor says there's no progress." But inside, fire consumed me. I wanted to tell Marcus everything, show him Eli's video, tell him his wife wasn't in a coma, but seeing his red eyes, his exhausted face, I couldn't. Marcus had already lost too much, and I feared this truth would be the final straw that destroyed him completely. That night, I lay awake in my old bed. The faint moonlight slipped through the curtains and illuminated the ceiling, but it couldn't dispel the darkness surrounding my mind. I gripped the blanket tightly, trying to force myself to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, sharp questions pierced my heart. Why did Chandra do this? What role did Dr. Thorne play in all of this? And most terribly, had all those years when I loved and trusted my daughter-in-law been just a pretense? I felt betrayed, not just by Chandra, but by my own naivety. I realized that I couldn't solve this alone. I needed help. The next morning, I woke up early and took Eli to school as usual. The boy remained silent, clutching his Spider-Man backpack, his gaze lost, as if trapped in a world he didn't understand. I stroked his head and tried to smile. "Try hard at school today. I'll pick you up early." Eli nodded, but I knew he didn't believe my comforting words. Seeing his small back disappear behind the school gate, I felt my heart tighten. I had to uncover the truth, not just for myself, but for Eli, so he wouldn't continue living in this shadow. I drove directly to the office of Detective Sergeant Davis, a private investigator who had been a friend of my late husband. He was a former police officer whom my husband always respected for his dedication and sharpness. Davis's office was on a rundown corner with a worn wooden sign. When I entered, I saw him sitting behind a scarred desk, his sharp eyes looking at me over silver-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Hayes, it's been a long time. What's going on? You look so stressed," he asked in a grave but attentive voice. I took a deep breath and told him everything, from Eli's innocent whisper and the unexpected video to the confrontation with the nurse, Sarah. I tried to remain composed, but my hands trembled as I showed him the video on the phone. Davis watched it over and over, frowning, his fingers gently tapping the table, as he always did. "This is no small thing, Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly. "If what you say is true, a conspiracy is underway. I will help you, but you have to keep this a secret, especially from your son." I nodded, relieved to share the burden, but also feeling heavier as the truth began to emerge. Davis promised to start monitoring the hospital immediately, and I left his office with a fragile spark of hope mixed with fear. That night, I took Eli back to the hospital. The air was just as suffocating as ever. The smell of disinfectant hit me, and the constant sounds of the machines came from Chandra's room. Marcus was already there, sitting next to his wife's bed, holding her hand tightly while silent tears rolled down his cheeks. Seeing him like that, the pain pierced me. Marcus, my strong son, the pride of my life, now looked like an empty man. I wanted to hug him, tell him the whole truth, but every time I met his bloodshot eyes, I didn't dare. How could I tell him that the woman he loved might be deceiving him? How could I shatter his heart even more? I used the excuse of going to the hall for water, leaving Eli next to his father. As I passed a corner near the nurse's station, I managed to see Sarah talking to a security guard. She slipped a thin folder into his hand, her gaze nervous, as if afraid of being discovered. I held my breath and slowed my pace to listen better. "Get this to him quickly," Sarah murmured in a trembling voice. The guard nodded. He put the folder in his jacket pocket and hurried toward Dr. Thorne's office. When Sarah turned back, her eyes met mine. She started. She quickly lowered her head, pretending not to see me, and hurried away. I moved forward, intending to call her, but the guard was already looking at me with distrust. I stopped, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. A few days later, Davis summoned me to a small coffee shop hidden in a deserted alley. When I arrived, he was already seated in a secluded corner, with a stack of photos in front of him. "Sit down," he said in a deep but tense voice. He pushed the photos toward me, and when I looked at them, my entire body went numb. They were secretly taken photos, showing Chandra in a patient gown with a white robe over it, stealthily leaving the room in the middle of the night. She walked with quiet but conscious steps, with no sign of being in a coma. Chandra headed directly to Dr. Thorne's office. The door closed abruptly behind her. The light was still on inside, even though it was past midnight. I took the photos with trembling hands, feeling the blood drain from me. This is real," I whispered, my voice breaking. Davis nodded with a serious look. "His office is very well soundproofed. I couldn't hear anything, but it's clear something strange is going on. I've monitored her several nights, and this isn't the only time she's done this. I'm going to keep investigating, but you have to be prepared. This could be bigger than we think." I nodded, though my mind was blank. Sarah's words echoed in my ears. I only follow Thorne's orders. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a terrifying picture I didn't want to believe. When I got home, I sat in the dark kitchen, the dim light falling on my trembling hands. Eli was already asleep, but I knew he was still carrying the fear for his mother. Marcus was at the hospital, caring for a wife who was perhaps deceiving him. I took out my phone, looked at Eli's video again, and thought about Davis's photos. Every detail was like a stab, but I knew I couldn't stop. I decided that in addition to trusting Davis, I had to look for more proof myself. I couldn't allow my family to keep living a lie. I had to protect Marcus, protect Eli, even if the price was my own heart in pieces. That morning I woke up before dawn. I couldn't sleep, not from tiredness, but because doubt and pain devoured me all night. I looked at the clock. It was barely 4 o'clock. Marcus, my son, was surely still sleeping deeply after a night of drinking. It was my chance to do what I had postponed for too long. I went up the stairs silently, barefoot, so as not to make noise. The house was eerily quiet. Only the tick-tock of the wall clock could be heard. I stood in front of Marcus and Chandra's bedroom door. I tightly gripped the doorknob, feeling my heart pound furiously in my chest. I knew I shouldn't do it, that I shouldn't snoop in my son and daughter-in-law's room, but I had no other option. If Chandra was truly betraying us, I needed proof, something to protect my family. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room was still permeated with Chandra's sweet and penetrating perfume, a fragrance that once seemed tender and familiar. On the dresser, a red lipstick lay open, as if she had left just minutes before. Those small details pierced my soul. I remembered when Chandra had just married, how carefully she styled her hair, how she smiled when trying on a new dress. Had it all been a sham? I shook my head, chasing away those memories, and began to search. I opened every drawer carefully, so as not to disturb anything. Every small sound, even the slight rustle of fabric, made me jump, fearing Marcus would wake up and discover me. I checked the dresser, the bookshelves, even under the bed, but found nothing but the usual objects. Finally, I opened the old closet where Chandra used to keep her things. In the bottom drawer, hidden under several layers of silk scarves, I found a package of blue folders tied with a rubber band. My hands trembled as I opened it, as if I were about to touch a horrifying secret. Inside were 2 life insurance policies, the documents carefully printed. Chandra's signature was clear at the bottom of each page. The first was a health insurance policy with a clause that would pay a huge sum if the patient required prolonged treatment or fell into a coma. The amount stunned me, enough to buy a large house. The second policy was even more terrifying, a temporary life insurance policy with a payout several times higher, enough to completely change a life. I read it over and over, trying to understand why Chandra, a woman without stable employment, had signed such large contracts. She used to ask Marcus for money for groceries, and sometimes even asked me, with some embarrassment, to cover basic expenses. So, where did the money to pay for those policies come from, and why did she need them? I took out my phone and photographed every page, careful not to wrinkle the paper. Every time I pressed the button, I felt like I was betraying my own family, but I knew I had no other choice. I put the folders back in their place, closed the drawer, and left the room. But just as I opened the door, I ran into Marcus. He was standing there, his eyes full of suspicion. His hair was messy. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, what are you doing in my room?" I started. I hid the phone behind my back, my heart pounding hard. "Oh, I was just looking for the old photo album," I replied awkwardly, forcing a smile. Marcus sighed. He didn't ask any more questions and walked staggeringly toward the kitchen, where I knew he would look for the liquor bottle again. Looking at my son's back, I felt my heart ache. I wanted to tell him everything, show him those documents, but I knew Marcus wasn't ready to face the truth yet. In the afternoon, I met Davis at the small coffee shop where we had agreed to meet. He had new information. When I sat down, he pushed another stack of photos toward me, this time taken in the hospital's empty parking lot. The images showed Chandra and Dr. Thorne inside a car, sharing intimate gestures impossible to deny. Chandra, dressed in patient clothes, was smiling at Thorne, her hand over his. Her gaze was full of intent. I stood motionless, stirring my already cold coffee with a trembling hand. "This is real, Davis," I whispered, my voice broken. He nodded with a grave voice. "I've been following them for several nights. This is not the first time. There's something very suspicious here, Mrs. Hayes. You need to prepare yourself. This might be bigger than we think." I looked at the photos, feeling like the whole world was crumbling beneath my feet. Chandra was not only faking a coma, she also had a hidden relationship with Dr. Thorne. This scheme didn't just have one actress. It had 2. And they were playing their parts perfectly to deceive my entire family. That midday, the Atlanta heat was suffocating, and the air inside my small bakery felt so dense I could barely breathe. I had just cleaned the counter, wiping the sweat from my brow, trying to concentrate on organizing the place to forget the doubts gnawing at me inside. In those days, every minute seemed like a battle, keeping the bakery going, caring for Eli, and facing the terrifying truth about Chandra. I had just arranged the remaining breads in a basket, ready to close and go rest, when thunderous knocks echoed on the alley door. The noise was so loud it startled me, and I nearly dropped the tray from my hands. I rushed to open it with a premonition in my chest. When the door opened, I froze. 3 men blocked the entrance, their faces hard, with snake and dragon tattoos running down their arms. The one who seemed to be the leader, tall with a shaved head, held out a crumpled paper and spoke in a harsh voice. "Where is Chandra? It's time to pay the debt!" I looked at the paper. My heart was pounding wildly, as if the blood were escaping my body. I tried to stay calm, even though my hands were already trembling. "You're mistaken. My daughter-in-law is in a coma in the hospital. She can't see anyone." The man let out a dry laugh, a sound so cruel a chill ran through me. "Coma? You think we're fools? Chandra asked us for a huge sum to invest in a business. If she plays smart, this family won't have peace." His words pierced me like a knife. I looked around and saw some neighbors peering from their doors, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and fear. I knew that if this escalated, the whole neighborhood would talk, and my family would be the target of whispers. I swallowed hard and replied in a controlled voice, "Please calm down. I don't know anything about these debts. Let me find out." But the leader wasn't willing to back down. He smiled sideways and pointed at my small house. "Find out. You have 1 week. If there's no money, sell the house and pay up." I felt the ground open beneath my feet. I wanted to protest, to scream that I had nothing to do with it, that Chandra was still in the hospital. But the three men's cold stares made it clear they weren't playing. I hurried inside. I opened the safe hidden in the kitchen and took out all the savings I had put away for years for Eli and the bakery. I put them in the leader's hand, my voice trembling. "Take this for now. I beg you. Give me more time." They looked at me with contempt, as if deciding whether to ruin everything right there. In the end, the leader put the money in his pocket and issued a final threat. 1 week, don't make us come back. Then the three of them left. Their heavy footsteps disappeared into the alley. I collapsed onto the steps, soaked in sweat, not from the heat, but from the fear and helplessness that was strangling me. Chandra, in debt. Investing in businesses. Those words echoed in my head, but they didn't make sense. How could she, whom I always believed to be so simple, be involved in something like this? Just at that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Davis. I opened it with still trembling hands and felt my heart stop when I saw what he had sent. They were photos of Chandra and Dr. Thorne inside a car parked at the hospital. They were embracing shamelessly, and Chandra's eyes looked at him with a tenderness that seemed to erase the entire world. Next to the photos was a short audio clip with a note from Davis. I recorded their conversation inside the car with a special device. You should listen. I turned on the recording. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. Chandra's voice sounded rough, but clear enough for me to hear every word. "Let me sleep a few more weeks, and then we'll move to the final step. That insurance money will settle all the debts and give us a new life." Thorne's voice responded, grave and calculated. "Relax, Chandra. Everything is going well. As long as no one suspects, we will succeed." I turned off the recording, feeling all strength drained from my body. Everything exploded in my head. Chandra wasn't just faking a coma. She didn't just have a relationship with Dr. Thorne. She had staged a sham to run away from debts and cash out the insurance money. She planned to leave everything behind, Marcus, Eli, and me, to start a new life with her accomplice. That afternoon, I sat in front of a cup of cold coffee, clenching my hands as if I could still hold on to a shred of courage. I knew that if I wanted to protect my family, I couldn't keep silent. Marcus, my son, had to know the truth, even if it shattered him. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the living room where Marcus was sitting, his gaze lost in the void. I put all the evidence on the table, the photos of Chandra and Thorne in the car, the copy of the insurance contract, and the phone with the recording. Marcus looked up with cloudy eyes, not understanding what I was doing. "Mom, what is all this?" he asked in a hoarse voice, still smelling of last night's alcohol. I sat across from him, trying to stay steady, though my heart was pounding hard. "Marcus, I need you to look at this. I know you don't want to believe it, but you have to face the truth." I pointed to the stack of photos, my voice breaking. "Chandra is not in a coma. She is deceiving us." Marcus shook his head over and over, his hands trembling as he touched the photos, until suddenly he threw them to the floor and shouted, "It can't be! Where did you get this? It's all rigged! Chandra would never betray me!" His red eyes seemed to desperately cling to a faith that was crumbling. I took his trembling hand, speaking as gently as I could. "Marcus, you need to wake up. Look at reality. Chandra didn't just deceive you. She also manipulated Eli's innocence. I know it hurts, but you can't keep living a lie. Play the recording." Chandra's voice sounded again, clear and chilling. "Let me sleep a few more weeks, and then we'll move to the final step. That insurance money will settle all the debts and give us a new life." Marcus froze, as if someone had slapped him. He listened to the entire audio and suddenly burst into tears, tears of pain and collapse. "Why, Mom, why did she do this to me? Why to Eli?" he whispered, his voice broken. I hugged him, feeling his body shake in my arms, not knowing how to comfort him. I could only say, "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm hurting too, but we have to be strong. For Eli." Marcus stood up unsteadily, went to the liquor cabinet, poured a glass of bourbon, and drank it in one gulp. Then he stumbled into his room and slammed the door shut. That slam echoed like a hammer blow to my chest. I knew my son needed time, but I also knew I couldn't wait any longer. The truth was naked, and if Chandra and Thorne were about to take the final step of their plan, I had to act before it was too late. I arranged to meet Davis the next morning in a secluded corner of the usual coffee shop. He was there with a cup of black coffee in front of him, his face full of tension. "Did you tell Marcus yet?" he asked as soon as I sat down. I nodded with a grave voice. He doesn't want to believe it, but a mother can't let her son continue to be deceived. "What do we do now, Davis?" He gently tapped the table with his fingers, his gaze sharp. "We have enough evidence to go to the police. The recording, the photos, the insurance contract. But if you want Marcus to see the truth with his own eyes, we need a final strike at the hospital. We have to make Chandra and Thorne expose themselves." I nodded, feeling both determination and fear. I knew Marcus needed to see it for himself. Otherwise, he would forever live in the illusion of the wife he once loved. The next day, I sought out Captain Lisa Coleman, an old college friend who was now the police chief of the area. We shared our youth, and I knew she was someone I could trust. In her small office, I told her everything, from Eli's video to Davis's evidence. Coleman listened, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. When I showed her the recording, she shook her head with a grave voice. "This is an organized scam, Mrs. Hayes. If what you say is true, Chandra and Thorne have violated not only ethics but the law." She paused and looked at me intently. "I'll help you, but we need a valid pretext to barge in without raising suspicion. Do you have a plan?" I didn't have time to answer when my phone vibrated in my purse. It was Dr. Thorne's number. I answered, my heart racing. His voice on the other end sounded heavy, with a false tone of compassion. "Mrs. Hayes, I deeply regret to inform you that Chandra's situation is worsening. Perhaps the family should prepare. Tomorrow morning, please be present. We will deliver the final result." A chill ran through me, as if I had touched a block of ice. There it was. This was the moment they planned to bring down the curtain on their charade. I tried to sound calm as I replied, "Yes, doctor, we'll be there tomorrow." Upon hanging up, I turned to Coleman, my voice trembling. "Tomorrow, in Chandra's room, that's the moment." Coleman nodded with a firm gaze. "All right, I will prepare the team. We will act at the precise moment." I felt a spark of hope, but at the same time, the fear grew. What would happen when Marcus faced the truth? Could he handle the blow? And Eli, my beloved grandson, how would he react to knowing his mother had deceived the whole family? That night, I took Eli to the home of Mrs. Peterson, the trusted neighbor who lived across the street. I didn't want the boy to witness the terrible scene that was coming. When I told him he would sleep at Mrs. Peterson's house that night, Eli looked at me with worry in his eyes. "Grandma, my mom is okay. You'll take me to see her tomorrow, right?" I hugged him, holding back tears. "That's right, son. I'll pick you up early tomorrow." But when the boy turned away, I felt my heart break. How could I protect him from such a cruel truth? When I returned home, I found Marcus sitting in the dark, a bottle of liquor rolling at his feet. He didn't say anything. He was just there, his eyes red and empty. I walked over, put my hand on his shoulder, and said a single sentence. "You have to go to the hospital tomorrow. You need to know the final truth." Marcus looked up, his face etched with pain, but he nodded in silence. I knew he also felt that everything was about to change forever. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was heavy as lead. I woke up early, not from the habit of baking bread, but from the feeling of unease that gripped my chest. Today was the day everything would come to light, and although I had prepared myself, my heart was still trembling. Marcus was sitting at the table without saying a word, his face haggard and exhausted after so many days lost between alcohol and pain. I looked at my son. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but my throat closed up. "Let's go, Marcus." That was all I could say in a hoarse voice. He nodded, stood up, and together we got into the car, driving in silence toward Piedmont General Hospital. Throughout the ride, Marcus stared out the window, his gaze lost, as if his soul had abandoned his body long ago. When we arrived at the hospital, the familiar hallway appeared with the strong smell of disinfectant and the constant noise of the machines. Sarah was there with a few other nurses, her face nervous, uneasy, as if she knew something was about to happen. I glanced at her but said nothing. I just squeezed Marcus's hand to give him courage. Dr. Thorne came out of his office with a file in his hand. He greeted us with feigned formality and said in a grave, solemn voice, "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, please come in." I nodded, though rage boiled inside me. I knew that just outside, Coleman and her team of officers were ready. We entered Chandra's room, where some relatives had already gathered. The air was charged, as if everyone sensed the tension. Chandra lay motionless in bed, her face pale, but I no longer saw her as a victim. I only saw a woman who had staged a cruel play, deceiving my entire family. Thorne, standing next to the bed, began his speech in a sorrowful voice. "After many days of effort, we regret to inform you that the patient's condition is continually worsening. We fear she may not survive. The family must be prepared." Marcus bowed his head. His shoulders trembled. Some relatives began to sob, and the wails spread, creating a scene of mourning that was as calculated as it was fake. I stood there, my fists clenched, holding back the fury that burned in my chest. I looked at Thorne and his perfect performance and knew it was only a matter of seconds before his theater reached its end. But what they didn't imagine was that today Coleman and I would be the ones to bring down the curtain. Just as Thorne raised his pen to sign the certificate of fatal prognosis, the door burst open. 3 uniformed police officers entered, led by Captain Coleman, whose gaze was cold and decisive. The room fell into absolute silence. Coleman declared firmly, "Dr. Thorne, Ms. Chandra Ortega, you are both under arrest for insurance fraud and conspiracy." Her voice resonated strongly, implacable, like a hammer blow that shattered the entire sham. And then something incredible happened. Chandra, the one supposedly in a deep coma, suddenly opened her eyes, sat up in bed, and screamed, "What are you talking about? You don't have proof. This is slander." Her shrill, desperate voice had nothing to do with someone who had been motionless for weeks. Marcus stood paralyzed, his mouth open, watching his dying wife scream like a wildcat. Chandra turned toward him, and a flash of panic appeared in her eyes, as if she understood she had just given herself away. She quickly turned her face away, unable to hold her husband's gaze. Coleman signaled, and an officer stepped forward, presenting all the evidence. The photos of Chandra and Thorne in the car, the recording of their conversation, the images of the insurance contract, and the statement from the nurse, Sarah. I took out my cell phone and showed the video Eli had recorded, which showed Chandra secretly opening her eyes, drinking water, and sitting up when no one was watching. Murmurs and comments began to fill the room. One relative whispered, "My God, how could this be possible?" Another exclaimed, "She deceived our entire family!" The atmosphere in the room became chaotic, as if the truth had just shattered all illusions. Marcus trembled, his gaze fixed on Chandra. Then, as if waking from a dream, he cried out, his voice broken, "Chandra, why did you do this to me? Why to Eli?" Chandra lunged toward him, trying to hug him, crying and pleading. Marcus, you have to understand. I didn't have another choice. I owed too much. I just wanted us to have a better life." But Marcus abruptly pushed her hands away. His eyes now only reflected rage and repulsion. "A better life. You abandoned our son. You abandoned this family just for money." His voice trembled, as if every word were a dagger plunging into his own chest. Thorne stood there, his head bowed, unable to offer any more excuses, while the recording from the car played. His voice echoed, cold and calculating. "Relax, Chandra. As long as no one suspects, we will succeed." The entire room fell silent. Only the hospital intercom could be heard in the distance. Coleman gave a signal, and the officers placed cold, silver handcuffs on both of their wrists. Chandra still struggled, screaming desperately, "I did everything because of the debts. I had no way out." But no one believed her anymore, not even the relatives who had been crying for her moments before. Now, they only looked at her with strange eyes. Marcus collapsed into the chair, his hands over his head, as if he couldn't bear the weight of the truth. I approached, placed my hand on my son's shoulder, and said softly, "This is the truth, son. I know it hurts, but we have to keep going." Marcus didn't answer. He just stayed there, the tears falling silently. I felt his pain as if it were my own. I had lost a daughter-in-law I had loved, but Marcus had lost a part of his life. The hospital room, once quiet, was now chaos. Chandra's screams became weaker and more distant as she was escorted out in handcuffs. Thorne walked behind her, his head low, with no trace of the authority of a hospital director. When the door closed, restoring silence, I looked around the room at the astonished faces of the relatives and felt a great emptiness in my heart. The truth had come to light, but it brought no joy. It only left pain and emptiness. A few months passed since the day the truth exploded in the hospital room, but every instant remains etched in my memory. The image of Chandra sitting up and screaming frantically, Marcus's eyes full of pain, and the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut on their wrists. Everything seemed like an unforgettable nightmare. But now, in the courtroom, I feel a slight relief, as if a weight is finally being lifted from my heart. Today is the day of the public trial for Chandra and Dr. Thorne, and I know it will be the final punctuation mark on the cruel drama that shattered my family. Marcus and I sat in the front row of the packed courtroom. The atmosphere was suffocating, filled with the murmurs of strangers, the press, and a few neighbors. Marcus was beside me, much thinner than before, but without the desperation that the bottles once gave him. In his gaze, there was calm, as if he had learned to live with the pain. I took his hand, squeezing it tightly to offer support. He looked at me, smiled weakly, and I understood that even though it still hurt, he was trying to move forward. The judge, a middle-aged man with a severe face, began reading the charges. His voice resonated clearly, every word like a hammer blow, shattering the falsehood of the last few months. Chandra and Thorne were accused of multiple felonies: fraud, insurance scam, and conspiracy to appropriate assets. All the evidence was publicly displayed on the large screen in the courtroom. Eli's video, Davis's photos, the recording in the car, and the insurance contracts I found in the drawer. Each piece of evidence was a part of the puzzle that exposed the elaborate plan concocted by Chandra and Thorne to deceive my entire family. Thorne sat in the defendant's box, his head bowed, not daring to look up. He admitted his guilt in a deep voice, almost a whisper, acknowledging that he had helped Chandra out of ambition and because of his relationship with her. Chandra, on the other hand, still tried to resist. She cried, her hair tangled, her red eyes looking toward Marcus. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be this way. I just wanted to pay off the debts. I wanted a better life for us." But those belated tears no longer moved anyone. Marcus looked at her coldly, without a drop of compassion. "You betrayed this family. You betrayed Eli just for money," he said, his voice trembling with rage and pain. The final sentence was dictated. Thorne received 6 years in prison. Chandra received 5 years. In addition, they were obligated to repay all damages. When the judge struck the gavel, the dry sound marked the end of everything. Chandra slumped, crying inconsolably, but no one in the room wanted to look at her. Thorne was escorted out with his head bowed, the figure of someone who once had power and was now nothing more than a shadow. Marcus stood next to me, his hands clasped. The tears were falling silently. I knew they weren't tears of suffering but of liberation. My son was finally free from the illusion of a wife he once loved. When we left the courthouse, the radiant Atlanta sun no longer burned as before. The press surrounded us, microphones in front of my face, questions thrown non-stop. I only said one sentence in a calm but firm voice. Justice has been served. Never play with a family's feelings, because the price will be too high. Marcus was beside me, saying nothing, but squeezing my hand tightly, as if he wanted to tell me he was ready to move forward. Our life slowly returned to its course, though the scars remained. My small bakery, Ellie's Sweet Spot, filled with customers again. The smell of flour and yeast brought back that feeling of home. Every morning I woke up early, kneaded the dough, baked the first batches of bread, and felt my heart lighter. Eli began to chatter again, helping me organize the bread, running around the shop with his pure smile. He still mentioned his mother, but no longer with the lost sadness of before. His laughter, like sunshine, filled the painful gaps in our small house. Marcus also changed. He got a new job at a mechanic's shop where he could concentrate on concrete things instead of getting lost in alcohol. I watched him learn to be a true father, spending time playing with Eli, taking him to school, and reading him stories every night. Some nights, I saw Marcus sitting silently by the window, his gaze lost. But I knew he was learning to forgive, not Chandra, but himself. One afternoon, when the whole family was gathered around the table, Eli suddenly looked up, his eyes wide, and looked at me. "Grandma, is Mom coming back someday?" The boy's question felt like a stab, but I smiled. I took his small hand and replied with tenderness, "Some people choose to go, Eli, but the important thing is that we still have each other. Grandma, your dad, and you. That is family." Marcus looked at me. His eyes shone with determination, and then he stroked Eli's head. "That's right, son. We will always be here for each other." Eli nodded. An innocent smile spread across his face, and for the first time in many months, I felt this house become warm again, just as it used to be. I stayed there, watching my son and my grandson, my heart filled with peace. The worst storm had passed, leaving scars, but also giving us the strength to move forward. I thought about the days of suffering, the sleepless nights, and all those times I thought I couldn't endure anymore. But now I know that my family made it. We not only survived, but became stronger, more united. I stood up. I poured another glass of orange juice for Eli and smiled, listening to him talk about the new drawing he had made in class. A drawing of Grandma, his dad, and him together under a bright sun. Seeing Eli's smile and Marcus's firm gaze, I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, we would continue forward together. My small house, once shattered by the storm, was now rebuilt, not with bricks, but with love and trust. And I, who had dedicated my whole life to protecting this family, finally found some peace in my heart. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We tell it not to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and pauses to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that illuminates the path of others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days.